Hi, it's Shannon Port, and I welcome you to our January 2020 Solar Feminine Activation Codes. We've been talking about this, and I've been planning to do our first Solar Feminine Activation Codes in 2020, and it took me a couple weeks because there's been so much going on our planet right now. We're going to probably do a little recap and just talk about some of the things that are happening on the earth, because we can all really see that things are shifting and things are moving and the outer world is changing. And so we can feel that within. Today we're going to be talking about, this is going to be a space that I bring in monthly. And so even though we're starting this month, mid-month, I plan to put this out at the beginning of every month, and it will be a space where we really look at the activity on the planet and look at how the consciousness of humanity is starting to alchemize and awaken. So if you follow my work, you know, on this channel, I often work with the Sophianic codes and divine feminine astrology. We do a couple videos a month where I really work with the transits and we work through the lunar cycles, and we talk a lot about the archetypal wisdom around the zodiac. In this space, we will bring some of that in as well, but we're also going to really hold this as a space where we get to look at the wisdom of the divine feminine. And so that is what I have my foundation in. That is what I specialize in. And so we're going to be bringing that in through the solar feminine. The solar feminine is really the nucleus of all the teachings that art of the feminine. And so if you're not familiar, you can find, I've done a lot of writing about the solar feminine on the Art of the Feminine website. It's under the Akashic Insight newsletter. And then you can find it some other places as well. But so if you're completely new to this work, you can find some information there. You can also find it in the playlists on this YouTube channel. I have lots of, in fact, I did a podcast, which I want to talk about. The beginning of the Art of the Feminine podcast was December 19th, 2012. That was our very first episode. And so all of those podcasts that went on for many years are in the archives on this channel. We just had the very first podcast was called Light Body Woman. And we just had our 7-year birthday this past December 19th. And so we've just completed a 7-year cycle. And so really, the solar feminine activation codes are meant to be the next cycle of 7 in the divine feminine wisdom codes. And so we did our first 7 years. You can find all of those in the playlist here. And now we're entering a new cycle. And this is really, really powerful. I've been talking about it. We did the archetypes of 2020, and we also did the return of the solar feminine codes in December. And so we're really ready to get this going. The social media for the channel is also Art of the Feminine. I want to mention that because sometimes people are looking and they don't find it. They're looking under my name, but there's an Art of the Feminine Facebook page as well as, which is thriving. It's a huge community. And then also I'm doing Art of the Feminine on Instagram now, and we're growing that. And I will be posting for this work on the Art of the Feminine on Instagram. So welcome. Happy 2020. I hope everyone's having a good first couple weeks of the year. I know that things are really moving, and you know, it's interesting because there's a lot of chaos and a lot of processing and a lot of healing, but there's also this sense of the new wave. The new galactic waves are coming in to baptize us in this spiritual light. And so that's, we're going to be talking about that. I refer to it as the descent of the Holy Spirit, but it's really the quintessence of the Divine Mother, the divine feminine principle in creation, bringing that light forward to begin to, it's like it's an initiation, because depending upon where we're at in our individual consciousness, as well as the collective consciousness, will determine how much of that light we're able to hold. And that is the purpose of us talking about the solar feminine activation code. So I'll break this into 3 parts. we're just going to look at what the divine feminine is, what we are referring to when we talk about the divine feminine and the solar feminine. The solar feminine Christ force, which I often refer to it as. We'll go into just looking at the planet. We'll talk a little bit about what's happening right now in conjunction with all the transits, the conjunctions, as well as eclipse season, because a lot is taking place right now. A lot's going down on planet Earth. And then we'll look at the theme for this specific solar feminine activation codes, which has to do with wealth, abundance, and healing poverty consciousness. So I should have said that at the beginning because it's really powerful. The first thing that we have to acknowledge is that we have a problem in this world with poverty. It's the greatest, it's the most immediate problem that we have, is that the pain and suffering that are connected with poverty, which allows for even greater pain and suffering to be connected with war, as well as all the other issues, as well as social issues, as well as global and climate issues that are related to this. The emotional body of the planet has to do with how well humanity is thriving, and specifically how we are thriving in the heart. And the heart, we'll just jump into the divine feminine principle. The heart is really the cradle of the divine feminine. It's the cradle of sacred union. It's the cradle and the tabernacle of the inner marriage. It's the cradle where we have our own microcosmic inner marriage, as well as our macrocosmic marriage that takes place in the eros gamos. Of the divine union of spirit and matter. We have to have an awakened heart principle. So let's just talk about that for a bit. So when we're talking, sometimes solar feminine, or specifically, more people are familiar with the term divine feminine. The divine feminine terminology can trigger consciousness on this planet. I get that a little bit. Still, I don't get that as much as I did when I first started. I first started doing this work and really publicly in 1999. But there was a period where, and then people weren't really aware of it. But then as it started coming in, people would get triggered by it. Like, it would immediately, hearing the word feminine would send us into polarity consciousness of male-female polarity. What we are talking about here, when we talk about the divine feminine, and then more specifically, we'll move into the solar feminine, we're talking about the primordial creative principle of creation. There is an absolute principle, but then there's a creative principle and a projector of reality, which we refer to as the primordial feminine. She's been called the Adi Shakti. She's the Shakti force, and specifically the highest supernal Shakti force is what, when we talk about the divine feminine, we're talking about the supernal. And as she works through the supernal triad and the supernal trinity of her divine creative force, which works through the Trinity. So we're talking about that. And when we talk about the solar feminine, we're talking about a spiritualized consciousness vehicle. So when we'll talk a little bit about the fall, just to kick this off, since it's our first one of January of 2020. It's our first solar feminine activation codes. There was a fall, and all our mythologies talk about this. There was a fall of our consciousness into this underworld, into this dense reality, into this world that was ruled by the archontic force, or even the evil force. It's ruled by the carnal force, and the force that had already fallen before we fell as a human consciousness. There was already a dark force occupying this realm. Now remember, we're talking about consciousness. Our human consciousness at one time was beyond human. It was more spiritualized and it was more pristine. We were in our primordial archetypal form, where we had access to all realms of creation, and we were not bound by the poverty consciousness and by the carnal consciousness that is in this 3D world. So remember, you can look at this as mythology. You can look at it as allegory. You can look at it as religious. It shows up everywhere. It shows up in our art. It shows up in our music. It shows up in our arts and sciences. There was a time when we had access and were operating from a higher form, and that's what an Art of the Feminine. I work with what I call the light body curriculum, and we're really working with awakening the seed of that consciousness that remains within us now to blossom into our spiritual body again, our light body consciousness. And so that's what this is all about. So we're talking about also being joined again to the cosmic mother, which is the cosmic Adi Shakti, the cosmic creative principle. We do this through what has been known as the resurrecting principle or the savior principle, the Christ force. And so the Christ force was a repairing archetype that was sent to restore and regenerate our fallen consciousness. And so what we see on this planet currently, and why I was so drawn to this, to make this my life path. I gave up other paths that I was on to really focus on this because it was so deeply in my heart. I knew this from the time I was a very, very young girl. And as I went through my own underworld journey and began to wake up, I realized that it was really important for us to understand how the feminine had been removed from the teachings by this archontic force that governs the lower world. And so when we look at spirituality and put under more of a patriarchal dominance, and so our soul energy has been under a patriarchal dominance, and this isn't about demonizing the male principle on the planet, but it's an overall principle that was void of understanding the power, wisdom, and truth of the female principle. And we see that because there's male dominance on the planet, and there's so much suffering in humanity. Even when we think of sexual abuse and sexual violence, it's predominantly towards women, and when we think of war and we think of what happens when we go in and take over and invade a territory, what happens is that the women and children are abused, raped, and trafficked. And this is a very, very well-known, well-documented fact, that it's the feminine principle that is exploited and abused. And this also, all masculine and feminine suffer from this, but it's the feminine principle within us, even within men, that is suppressed, and the male principle becomes more in its shadow side, aggressive, and in its taking. It has a taking quality where it thinks nothing of taking from the feminine. Now, this quality of taking from the feminine also is that there's this male-female polarity has also been really made active and alive in the female part of the polarity as well, because the female principle has been taught to fear each other, compete with each other, take from each other without blinking an eye. I see this all the time. I see this even in spiritual communities where there is an underbelly and a lack of respect that the feminine principle even has for itself. And so we're all in this healing together. But what's happened is that this has been a direct hit on the female polarity and its ability to birth the light on earth and to project the light through its offspring, both its offspring through the heart, as well as its offspring through the womb, as well as the offspring through the mind. And so it's left humanity in poverty consciousness. That's what this is, and that's what our theme is for today. We're going to look at that for just a few minutes. These videos aren't meant to be super long. I want them to be more digestible. But that's what we're talking about here. So when we're talking about the regeneration of our fallen consciousness, we're talking about the rise of the divine feminine, the feminine that fell, being risen into the bridal chamber to be really fertilized and penetrated by spirit, so that it's able to birth again in its truth and in its wisdom and in its light. All right, let's just look at. There's so much. We're gonna have a lot of good conversations in this space. So just to be clear, there is a carnal desire that rules this force. And this is what I want to say before we move on. This is a time for us to all be accountable. We have to take access and take inventory of our own consciousness. Nobody can do it for us. In order to do this, in order for us to be prepared to receive the waves that are coming in from the descent of the spirit above, we have to purify our consciousness below and help it to rise up so that it's worthy and ready and in resonance to receive that. That means that there's a lot of work. This is not easy work because we're under the hypnotic influence of these carnal elementals, which are very selfish, very greedy. Put it this way, we're ruled by the zodiac here, which is the fallen zodiac, which holds the archontic force that is active on our consciousness. So what happens is we're under the karmic influence, we're on the wheel, but you can have lifetimes where you're living a bad state of consciousness, and you can be very wealthy and very prosperous. In this dimension, it's very possible to be holding a negative polarity and still be very wealthy and very capable of generating income, wealth, power, fame, lust, all the principles in this polarity. It's also possible to be very pure and good and living in truth in the heart and be very poor in this reality. This reality is not a balanced, harmonized playing field. And so that's what we're talking about. We're birthing the harmonizing principle of the divine feminine. And then her domain is the heart. We see it in the scales of Libra. It's where we balance our light and our dark, and it's where we birth a harmonious, artistic, creative reality. In order to do that, there's some purification involved because we're constantly under this lust, and oftentimes it holds itself in the underbelly, in our body of pain, where we don't even see it. We don't even realize that our motives. You hear about the pure voice and the devil voice. We hear about the angel and the devil, the angels and demons that speak into our ears. We constantly have a good voice, but then we also have the dark voice that's constantly pulling us down, constantly getting us to be selfish, constantly getting us to be suspicious and fearful, constantly getting us to have low self-worth, constantly getting us to compete against each other, and even most of all, consciously getting us to judge each other and to, one of the main principles that's used is to deplatform the feminine and to take off the feminine by doing smear campaigns on reputation. The truth is that the most damage has been done to the spiritual principle as it was birthing on this planet by smear campaigns that were put out there with suspicion, to make everybody suspicious of the birthing of the light on the planet. Even there have been secret societies, there have been mystery schools, there have been the groups that have held the wisdom that was really needed. And as they began to influence people, there were hits on the reputation. There definitely exists an abuse and a misuse of the wisdom. Absolutely. But I can assure you that only about 50% of those accusations are accurate. There's a huge campaign by both when we think of the patriarchal institutions of the church, of the aristocracy, of the crown, they targeted those groups that were holding space and birthing the Christ force on earth. And I know this because I've been privy to be part of receiving through an oral lineage teachings that have been held since ancient times. And these teachings are oftentimes attacked by people who don't really understand what they're talking about. So we need to get really clear that a lot of our judgment, a lot of our gossip, a lot of our accusations are indeed false. We get suspicious because there are dark agendas on the planet, but our way, we can point those out, but we usually end up going down a very, very slippery slope when we do so, because oftentimes we're talking about things that are hearsay or that we've brought in, but they weren't the whole truth. We oftentimes bring things in partial truth. The only place the real truth can be birthed is when we actually are embodying the divine feminine, solar feminine Christ consciousness, which will raise us into the purity of what we call the Christ consciousness, the avatar consciousness. It's a pure consciousness that is so filled with compassion, so filled with wealth, so filled with the ability to generate, so filled, it's the unifying principle. It's the principle that brings us together as a humanity. And we have some work to do in this area, and that's my intention, to do that. And if I'm sounding intense, it's because it's so important right now. There's a lot of adversity birthing in places where there should be harmony. This is the harmonizing principle we're birthing, and it starts within each and every particular consciousness on this planet. So we have to stop warring with each other in order to really be a vessel for the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit has not cut us off. We've cut the Holy Spirit off. In other words, the Holy Spirit is there showering down on all of us. We are the ones that have put up this block. And there has been certain measures taken by the higher consciousness to make sure that this consciousness doesn't creep up the ladder. But that's why the accountability is so important right now. It's so huge and so important. So let's look at the planet. We'll just talk a little bit about the planet. We've seen in January, just what we've seen happening. We've seen, and I want to talk a little bit about what's known as climate crisis, because that's a very big issue right now, and how it relates to our planet, how it relates to this divine feminine planet that we live on. And so, because there's a lot of controversy over who's right about the science, we are here to talk about beyond any science, about the truth of the integrity of how we treat our world. And there's been hit campaigns on both sides in this area as well. And so we want to really be clear when we're talking about what we mean by having integrity with this very planet that we live on. So we're going to talk about that. That's huge right now. That's one of the issues that's active. We have the fires, and then everything else around the fires. We have the fires in Australia, and which has, there's just so much happening there. But there's also all kinds of planetary weather things happening. We have, just this. So just looking at sort of the patriarchal dismantling that's happening, we saw there was big news in the royal family this month. This is around sort of the Saturn-Pluto conjunctions and all of the eclipses we've had in Capricorn, and the North Node being in Cancer. We've seen a big announcements coming out in Russia by the Russian president just recently this past week that have to do with the stronghold of the patriarchal energies. We have the impeachment process happening in the United States, as well as the triggering influence of the U.S. and in the Middle East and all of that. And that's a bigger picture than what we realize right now. But that's all part of this. That's all part of these energies that are active right now. We have it's an election year in the U.S., so there's a lot of energy building in that department. And then we have so much misuse of the word. This is what we're really looking at right now. We have to come back into integrity. The word is our Christ force. When we are truly regenerated and risen, our word is so divine, and it's the sword. It's the sword that becomes the sword of truth and the sword of light. It's the word is actually connected to the air element, and the swords, in the archetypes, are connected to the air element as well. We are really coming to a time when we're going to have to clean up. Humanity has really taken liberties with the power of the word and misused it, and it's not connected to the heart. It's not connected to wisdom and truth. And so that's one of the things we're working on right now. So I just want to talk about the planet and what is known as Christ consciousness being birthed onto this planet, is that, and the climate crisis as well, is that there's big arguments in different movements about the climate crisis being engineered. Is it real? Is it not real? We're going beyond all of that right now. I'm not interested in getting into that right now. There's all kinds of it. Some of the information, we always have some information that's engineered, because just like the divine wisdom that we work with, the divine feminine wisdom, once the dark gets its hands on it, it starts manipulating the heck out of it. So manipulation is a given. In this realm, the realm we're talking about, the fallen realm of the carnal elements, until we see people who have accessed their solar feminine codes of creation, we're going to see manipulation. We have to just assume that it's the truth. That is what's out there. So both sides, people who agree with it and disagree with this, there's a little bit of truth on both sides. The highest truth, the truth of the heart, is that we are at 100% out of alignment in how we treat this earth that we live on. The way we treat the planet, the way we treat our understanding of the of growth in the life force on this planet is disrespected. We have punished and shamed the indigenous tribes that hold the wisdom in this area, and have just blotted it out. And that has been done very purposefully by a patriarchal force. It's happening at light speed right now. So to say that we should not deal with what's being called the climate crisis is really the planet crisis. It's really the personal crisis, because the planet on the tree of life is us. We are the planet. Human vessel is the planet, and the way we treat the planet is the way we treat each other, is the way we treat ourselves. I've done a lot of writing about the technology of the goddess. Our inner technology is the energy, is the true energy of this planet. And so we've been derailed from developing in a global consciousness kind of way, the true energy and even the solar energy that can empower this whole planet. We have been stripped of that understanding, and that understanding is coming from those who also are fighting some of the issues around climate crisis. And so there's half truths everywhere. Follow your heart. I would not get so involved with this, because even with meaning like the fight, follow your heart. Those people who are out there that are truly, truly wanting to raise consciousness on the earth and the planet, it's the path of the heart. And the climate, in the divine feminine wisdom, the climate is our emotional body. So we do have a climate crisis. It is the emotional body of the goddess is under assault and attack 24/7, both the earth and our human consciousness. And that's really the solar feminine. It's our emotional body and our ability to power the earth and to power ourselves back into the cosmic unity. And so that being said, no, it's pretty intense, but I just wanted to say that. Talk a couple minutes about healing our poverty consciousness, and then I'll begin to close out. So I'm so used to doing live streams. This is the first time I've done this without it being a live stream. So I'm pre-recording it and putting it out. We'll see how that goes. So this is what I want to say. I've done a lot of work on the return of the cosmic mother. We're remembering the cosmic mother and humanity. And this was first birthed in my work, in my deep work with fertility, which started in the 90s. We absolutely have been cut off from the higher wisdom of the divine mother, the supernal mother. And because of that, her children are living in this dimension in poverty consciousness. As we said, you can be very, very bad. You can be very, very dark. And by that, I mean negative and selfish, greedy, selfish, and living in just like the blind, lustful consciousness, and be rewarded with wealth in this world, because that's the playing field that we live on. What we need to do is access the true wealth of who we are. Which the true wealth is the knowledge. It's the grail. The grail of who we are is the grail that's meant to generate our reality as we're moving forward. And in order to embody that grail, in order to become the true risen divine feminine principle, we have to look at our selfishness. We have to look at our judgment and condemnation of others. There are people who have great amounts of spiritual information and knowledge and are good people. But in the underbelly is hidden a deep, ferocious judgment. That judgment is I don't even want to say the word, but it creates illness and it creates attack within our own being. We have to take a look at that, each one of us, and understand how we carry that, because in order to have true wealth and to attach back to the archetype that we fell from, we have to be pure. We have to be pure. It doesn't mean that we are pushovers. It doesn't mean that we allow people to walk all over us. Quite the opposite. It means that we walk with the power of the goddess, the risen principle of consciousness. The goddess is the consciousness with a capital C that's been regenerated. And in order to do that, we have to truly liberate the wealth of spirit by this purity, in order to activate the seed atom that's in our heart that contains the blueprint of our spiritual body and our body of light. In order to do this, we have to begin to understand that we were one being that fell and broke into millions, billions of parts now. And so although we have to recognize some of the good and evil in the world, it's absolutely important. We're part of all of it. We're part of all of it. And what we're doing is we're purifying that part of ourselves, that fall, our subconscious, and raising it up. Each one of us carry it. I carry it, you carry it, we all carry it. We can't see it unless we carry it. And so that's why sometimes when you have the moments of enlightenment, you realize that it was all an illusion. What we've been taught to see through the eyes, but what's really there can only be seen with the heart. And we're experiencing that slowly but surely. But the second we go back into the second those elementals and the archontic force jumps on us, we fall out of it. And the more we touch that principle, the harder the fall is. So that sometimes the more spiritual you are, the more awake you are. The universe makes it so that the more wisdom you have and carry, when you fall, it really is harsh, because she's trying to get all her units to wake up. And so we're privy to the wisdom because we are meant to be accountable and hold it. And that's what we all need to do. I want to say that's our liberation. And I want to say that it's coming in with a lot of love and a lot of divine love, that we are love. We all have love. We all know it. We have seeds for each other, but we have to try harder. We have to work a little harder. In the masculine lineages, a lot of the feminine has been stripped and just been used as a tool of lust. There are awakened consciousness around the planet, but they have still not truly understood what this principle is. And we'll be talking more about how it affects the female side of the polarity, because the female side of the polarity carries a great deal of the pain of this. It's very, very deep. But we're raising that polarity right now, and so that we can have the harmony and we can restore the dance, and we can restore the vessel that's going to be taking us back in. So I think I'm going to close out now. This is the first time I'm recording a video without a live stream, and so it's interesting to just be talking about all this stuff. It's so deep and it's so powerful. It can really, really feel intense. But I'm gonna lighten up with it too, because we also have to keep our playfulness and we have to keep our childlike heart. So that being said, I invite you to go back and listen to some of those Light Body Woman and Art of the Feminine podcasts that are on this channel. I'm actually doing a Light Body Woman training right now. And if you're seeing this, I did an intro call last week, but we're going to be meeting for 8 weeks. It's a pretty intense mentoring process, which we're going to start first session on January 22nd. So if you see this in time and you'd like to join, you can contact me. I'll put my information in the description box. And that being said, it was so nice to have you here. If you enjoy the content, please give the video a thumbs up, like it. Please leave me comments. I can't wait to come back and see how you're receiving this, and subscribe, because we're going to be this will be a monthly report, but there's going to be a lot of updates that I'm going to be putting on the channel as well. And so that being said, we'll just take a moment and close out with I am. We'll close out with I am before me. I am behind me. I am at my left. I am at my right. I am above me. I am below me. I am unto me. And then you take a deep, deep breath in and just fill it up with as much air as you can and hold your breath for just a moment. Create a little prana under your solar plexus and then release it all out. We seal it with I am, I am. I know I am. I am, I am. I know I am. I am, I am. And I will see you very, very soon. Many, many blessings and namaste.